Section 4 of State of the Union Addresses by United States Presidents, 1923 to 1932. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Joanne Turner. Section 4, President Calvin Coolidge, December 8, 1925. Part 2. National Defense. Never before in time of peace has our country maintained so large and effective a military force as it now has. The Army, Navy, Marine Corps, National Guard, and organized reserves represent a strength of about 558,400 men. These forces are well-trained, well-equipped, and high in morale. A sound Selective Service Act, giving broad authority for the mobilization in time of peril of all the resources of the country, both persons and materials, is needed to perfect our defense policy in accordance with our ideals of equality. The provision for more suitable housing, to be paid for out of funds derived from the sale of excess lands pending before the last Congress, ought to be brought forward and passed. Reasonable replacements ought to be made to maintain a sufficient ammunition reserve. The Navy has the full treaty tonnage of capital ships. Work is going forward in modernizing the older ones, building aircraft carriers, additional fleet submarines, and fast scout cruisers. But we are carefully avoiding anything that might be construed as a competition in armaments with other nations. The joint Army and Navy maneuvers at Hawaii, followed by the cruise of a full battle fleet to Australia and New Zealand, were successfully carried out. These demonstrations revealed a most satisfactory condition of the ships and the men engaged. Last year, at my suggestion, the General Board of the Navy made an investigation and report on the relation of aircraft to warships. As a result, authorizations and appropriations were made for more scout cruisers and fleet submarines, and for completing aircraft carriers and equipping them with necessary planes. Additional training in aviation was begun at the military and naval academies. A method of coordination and cooperation of the Army and Navy and the principal aircraft builders is being perfected. At the suggestion of the Secretaries of War and Navy, I appointed a special board to make a further study of the problem of aircraft. The report of the Air Board ought to be reassuring to the country, gratifying to the service, and satisfactory to the Congress. It is thoroughly complete and represents the mature thought of the best talent in the country. No radical change in the organization of the service seems necessary. The Departments of War, Navy, and Commerce should each be provided with an additional assistant secretary, not necessarily with statutory duties, but who would be available, under the direction of the secretary, to give especial attention to air navigation. We must have an air strength worthy of America. Provision should be made for 2 additional brigadier generals for the Army Air Service. Temporary rank corresponding to their duties should be awarded to active flying officers in both Army and Navy. Aviation is of great importance, both for national defense and commercial development. We ought to proceed in its improvement by the necessary experiment and investigation. Our country is not behind in this art. It has made records for speed and for the excellence of its planes. It ought to go on maintaining its manufacturing plants capable of rapid production giving national assistance to the layout of airways, equipping itself with a moderate number of planes, and keeping an air force trained to the highest efficiency. While I am a thorough believer in national defense and entirely committed to the policy of adequate preparation, I am just as thoroughly opposed to instigating or participating in a policy of competitive armaments. Nor does preparation mean a policy of militarizing. Our people and industries are solicitous for the cause of peace, country, and have great respect for the Army and Navy, and for the uniform worn by the men who stand ready at all times for our protection, to encounter the dangers and perils necessary to military service. But all of these activities are to be taken not in behalf of aggression, but in behalf of peace. They are the instruments by which we undertake to do our part to promote goodwill and support stability among all peoples. Veterans. If anyone desires to estimate the esteem in which the veterans of America are held by their fellow citizens, it is but necessary to remember that the current budget calls for an expenditure of about $650 million in their behalf. This is nearly the amount of the total cost of the national government, exclusive of the post office, before we entered the last war. At the two previous sessions of Congress, legislation affecting veterans' relief was enacted and the law liberalized. This legislation brought into being a number of new provisions tending more nearly to meet the needs of our veterans, as well as afford the necessary authority to perfect the administration of these laws. Experience with the new legislation so far has clearly demonstrated its constructive nature. It has increased the benefits received by many and has made eligible for benefits many others. Direct disbursements to the veteran or his dependents exceeding $21 million have resulted, which otherwise would not have been made. The degree of utilization of our hospitals has increased through making facilities available to the incapacitated veteran, regardless of service origin of the disability. This new legislation has also brought about a marked improvement of service to the veteran. The organizations of ex-servicemen have proposed additional legislative changes which you will consider. But until the new law and the modifications made at the last session of Congress are given a more thorough test, further changes in the basic law should be few, and made only after careful though sympathetic consideration. The principal work now before the Veterans Bureau is the perfection of its organization and further improvements in service. Some minor legislative changes are deemed necessary to enable the Bureau to retain that high grade of professional talent essential in handling the problems of the Bureau. Such changes as tend toward the improvement of service and the carrying forward to completion of the hospital construction program are recommended for the consideration of the proper committees of Congress. With the enormous outlay that is now being made in behalf of the veterans and their dependents, with a tremendous war debt still requiring great annual expenditure, with the still high rate of taxation, while every provision should be made for the relief of the disabled and the necessary care of dependents, the Congress may well consider whether the financial condition of the government is not such that further bounty, through the enlargement of general pensions and other emoluments, ought not to be postponed. Agriculture. No doubt the position of agriculture as a whole has very much improved since the Depression of 3 and 4 years ago. But there are many localities and many groups of individuals, apparently through no fault of their own, sometimes due to climatic conditions and sometimes to the prevailing price of a certain crop, still in a distressing condition. This is probably temporary, but it is none the less acute. National government agencies, the Departments of Agriculture and Commerce, the Farm Loan Board, the intermediate credit banks, and the Federal Reserve Board are all cooperating to be of assistance and relief. On the other hand, there are localities and individuals who have had one of their most prosperous years. The general price level is fair, but here again there are exceptions both ways, some items being poor while others are excellent. In spite of a lessened production, the farm income for this year will be about the same as last year, and much above the 3 preceding years. Agriculture is a very complex industry. It does not consist of one problem, but of several. They cannot be solved at one stroke. They have to be met in different ways, and small gains are not to be despised. It has appeared from all the investigations that I have been able to make that the farmers as a whole are determined to maintain the independence of their business. They do not wish to have meddling on the part of the government or to be placed under the inevitable restrictions involved in any system of direct or indirect price fixing, which would result from permitting the government to operate in the agricultural markets. They are showing a very commendable skill in organizing themselves to transact their own business through cooperative marketing, which will this year turn over about $2,500,000,000, or nearly 1/5 of the total agricultural business. In this, they are receiving help from the government. The Department of Agriculture should be strengthened in this facility in order to be able to respond when these marketing associations want help. While it ought not to undertake undue regulation, it should be equipped to give prompt information on crop prospects, supply, demand, current receipts, imports, exports, and prices. A bill embodying these principles, which has been drafted under the advice and with the approval of substantially all the leaders and managers in the cooperative movement, will be presented to the Congress for its enactment. Legislation should also be considered to provide for leasing the unappropriated public domain for grazing purposes, and adopting a uniform policy relative to grazing on the public lands and in the national forests. A more intimate relation should be established between agriculture and the other business activities of the nation. They are mutually dependent, and can each advance their own prosperity most by advancing the prosperity of the other. Meantime, the government will continue those activities which have resulted in an unprecedented amount of legislation and the pouring out of great sums of money during the last 5 years. The work for good roads, better land and water transportation, increased support for agricultural education, extension of credit facilities through the farm loan boards and the intermediate credit banks, the encouragement of orderly marketing, and a repression of wasteful speculation will all be continued. Following every other depression, after a short period, the price of farm produce has taken and maintained the lead in the advance. This advance had reached a climax before the war. Everyone will recall the discussion that went on for 4 or 5 years prior to 1914 concerning the high cost of living. This history is apparently beginning to repeat itself. While wholesale prices of other commodities have been declining, farm prices have been increasing. There is every reason to suppose that a new era in agricultural prosperity lies just before us, which will probably be unprecedented. Mussel shoals. The problem of mussel shoals seems to me to have assumed a place all out of proportion with its real importance. It probably does not represent in market value much more than a first-class battleship, yet it has been discussed in the Congress over a period of years and for months at a time. It ought to be developed for the production of nitrates primarily, and incidentally for power purposes. This would serve defensive, agricultural, and industrial purposes. I am in favor of disposing of this property to meet these purposes. The findings of the Special Commission will be transmitted to the Congress for their information. I am convinced that the best possible disposition can be made by direct authorization of the Congress. As a means of negotiation, I recommend the immediate appointment of a small, joint special committee, chosen from the appropriate general standing committees of the House and Senate, to receive bids, which, when made, should be reported with recommendations as to acceptance, upon which a law should be enacted, affecting a sale to the highest bidder who will agree to carry out these purposes. If anything were needed to demonstrate the almost utter incapacity of the national government to deal directly with an industrial and commercial problem, it has been provided by our experience with this property. We have expended vast fortunes. We have taxed everybody, but we are unable to secure results which benefit anybody. This property ought to be transferred to private management under conditions which will dedicate it to the public purpose for which it was conceived. Reclamation. The national government is committed to a policy of reclamation and irrigation, which it desires to establish on a sound basis and continue in the interest of the localities concerned. Exhaustive studies have recently been made of federal reclamation, which have resulted in improving the projects and adjusting many difficulties. About 1/3 of the projects is in good financial condition. Another third can probably be made profitable, while the other third is under unfavorable conditions. The Congress has already provided for a survey which will soon be embodied in a report. That ought to suggest a method of relief which will make unnecessary further appeals to the Congress. Unless this can be done, federal reclamation will be considerably retarded. With the greatly increased cost of construction and operation, it has become necessary to plan in advance, by community organization and selective agriculture, methods sufficient to repay these increasing outlays. The human and economic interests of the farmer citizens suggest that the states should be required to exert some effort and assume some responsibility, especially in the intimate, detailed, and difficult work of securing settlers and developing farms which directly profit them, but only indirectly and remotely can reimburse the nation. It is believed that the federal government should continue to be the agency for planning and constructing the great undertakings needed to regulate and bring into use the rivers, the West, many of which are interstate in character, but the detailed work of creating agricultural communities and a rural civilization on the land made ready for reclamation ought to be either transferred to the state in its entirety or made a cooperative effort of the state and federal government. Shipping. The maintenance of a merchant marine is of the utmost importance for national defense and the service of our commerce. We have a large number of ships engaged in that service. We also have a surplus supply, costly to care for, which ought to be sold. All the investigations that have been made under my direction, and those which have been prosecuted independently, have reached the conclusion that the fleet should be under the direct control of a single executive head, while the shipping board should exercise its judicial and regulatory functions in accordance with its original conception. The report of Henry G. Dalton, a businessman of broad experience, with a knowledge of shipping, made to me after careful investigation, will be transmitted for the information of the Congress. The studies pursued under the direction of the United States Chamber of Commerce will also be accessible, and added to these will be the report of the Special Committee of the House. I do not advocate the elimination of regional considerations, but it has become apparent that without centralized executive action, the management of this great business, like the management of any other great business, will flounder in incapacity and languish under a division of counsel. A plain and unmistakable reassertion of this principle of unified control, which I have always been advised was the intention of the Congress to apply, is necessary to increase the efficiency of our merchant fleet. Coal. The perennial conflict in the coal industry is still going on, to the great detriment of the wage earners, the owners, and especially to the public. With deposits of coal in this country capable of supplying its needs for hundreds of years, inability to manage and control this great resource for the benefit of all concerned is very close to a national economic failure. It has been the subject of repeated investigation and reiterated recommendation. Yet the industry seems never to have accepted modern methods of adjusting differences between employers and employees. The industry could serve the public much better and become subject to a much more effective method of control if regional consolidations and more freedom in the formation of marketing associations under the supervision of the Department of Commerce were permitted. At the present time, the national government has little or no authority to deal with this vital necessity of the life of the country. It has permitted itself to remain so powerless that its only attitude must be humble supplication. Authority should be lodged with the President and the Departments of Commerce and Labor, giving them power to deal with an emergency. They should be able to appoint temporary boards with authority to call for witnesses and documents, conciliate differences, encourage arbitration, and, in case of threatened scarcity, exercise control over distribution. Making the facts public under these circumstances, through a statement from an authoritative source, would be of great public benefit. The report of the last Coal Commission should be brought forward, reconsidered, and acted upon. Prohibition. Under the orderly processes of our fundamental institutions, the Constitution was lately amended, providing for national prohibition. The Congress passed an act for its enforcement, and similar acts have been provided by most of the states. It is the law of the land. It is the duty of all who come under its jurisdiction to observe the spirit of that law, and it is the duty of the Department of Justice and the Treasury Department to enforce it. Action to prevent smuggling, illegal transportation in interstate commerce, abuse in the use of permits, and existence of sources of supply for illegal traffic is almost entirely imposed upon the federal government. Through treaties with foreign governments and increased activities of the Coast Guard, revenue agents, district attorneys, and enforcement agents, effort is being made to prevent these violations. But the Constitution also puts a concurrent duty on the states. We need their active and energetic cooperation, the vigilant action of their police, and the jurisdiction of their courts to assist in enforcement. I request of the people observance of the public officers' continuing efforts for enforcement, and of the Congress favorable action on the budget recommendation for the prosecution of this work. Waterway development. For many years, our country has been employed in plans and, the next word is illegible, for the development of our intracoastal and inland waterways. This work along our coast is an important adjunct to our commerce. It will be carried on, together with the further opening up of our harbors, as our resources permit. The government made an agreement during the war to take over the Cape Cod Canal, under which the owners made valuable concessions. This pledged faith of the government ought to be redeemed. Two other main fields are under consideration. One is the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence, including the Erie Canal. This includes stabilizing the lake level and is both a waterway and power project. A joint commission of the United States and Canada is working on plans and surveys, which will not be completed until next April. No final determination can be made, apparently, except under treaty as to the participation of both countries. The other is the Mississippi River stem. This is almost entirely devoted to navigation. Work on the Ohio River will be completed in about 3 years. A modern channel connecting Chicago, New Orleans, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh should be laid out and work on the tributaries prosecuted. Some work is being done of a preparatory nature along the Missouri, and large expenditures are being made yearly in the lower reaches of the Mississippi and its tributaries, which contribute both to flood control and navigation. Preliminary measures are being taken on the Colorado River project, which is exceedingly important for flood control, irrigation, power development, and water supply to the area concerned. It would seem to be very doubtful, however, whether it is practical to secure affirmative action of the Congress, except under a joint agreement of the several states. The government has already expended large sums upon scientific research and engineering investigation in promotion of this Colorado River project. The actual progress has been retarded for many years by differences among the 7 states in the basin over their relative water rights and among different groups as to methods. In an attempt to settle the primary difficulty of the water rights, Congress authorized the Colorado River Commission, which agreed on November 24, 1922, upon an interstate compact to settle these rights, subject to the ratification of the state legislatures and Congress. All 7 states, except Arizona, at one time ratified. The Arizona legislature making certain reservations which failed to meet the approval of the governor. Subsequently, an attempt was made to establish the compact upon a 6-state basis, but in this case, California imposed reservations. There appears to be no division of opinion upon the major principles of the compact, but difficulty in separating contentions to methods of development from the discussion of it. It is imperative that flood control be undertaken for California and Arizona, preparation made for irrigation, for power, and for domestic water. Some or all of these questions are combined in every proposed development. The federal government is interested in some of these phases, state governments and municipalities and irrigation districts in others, and private corporations in still others. Because of all this difference of view, it is most desirable that Congress should consider the creation of some agency that will be able to determine methods of improvement solely upon economic and engineering facts, that would be authorized to negotiate and settle, subject to the approval of Congress, the participation, rights, and obligations of each group in any particular works. Only by some such method can early construction be secured. Water power. Along with the development of navigation, should go every possible encouragement for the development of our water power. While steam still plays a dominant part, this is more and more becoming an era of electricity. Once installed, the cost is moderate, has not tended greatly to increase, and is entirely free from the unavoidable dirt and disagreeable features attendant upon the burning of coal. Every facility should be extended for the connection of the various units into a superpower plant, capable at all times of a current increasing uniformity over the entire system. Railroads. The railroads throughout the country are in a fair state of prosperity. Their service is good, and their supply of cars is abundant. Their condition would be improved and the public better served by a system of consolidations. I recommend that the Congress authorize such consolidations under the supervision of the Interstate Commerce Commission, with power to approve or disapprove when proposed parts are excluded or new parts added. I am informed that the railroad managers and their employees have reached a substantial agreement as to what legislation is necessary to regulate and improve their relationship. Whenever they bring forward such proposals, which seem sufficient also to protect the interests of the public, they should be enacted into law. It is gratifying to report that both the railroad managers and railroad employees are providing boards for the mutual adjustment of differences in harmony with the principles of conference, conciliation, and arbitration. The solution of their problems ought to be an example to all other industries. Those who ask the protections of civilization should be ready to use the methods of civilization. A strike in modern industry has many of the aspects of war in the modern world. It injures labor and it injures capital. If the industry involved is a basic one, it reduces the necessary economic surplus and, increasing the cost of living, it injures the economic welfare and general comfort of the whole people. It also involves a deeper cost. It tends to embitter and divide the community into warring classes, and thus weakens the unity and power of our national life. Labor can make no permanent gains at the cost of the general welfare. All the victories won by organized labor in the past generation have been won through the support of public opinion. The manifest inclination of the managers and employees of the railroads to adopt a policy of action in harmony with these principles marks a new epoch in our industrial life. Outlying possessions. The time has come for careful investigation of the expenditures and success of the laws by which we have undertaken to administer our outlying possessions. A very large amount of money is being expended for administration in Alaska. It appears so far out of proportion to the number of inhabitants and the amount of production as to indicate cause for thorough investigation. Likewise, consideration should be given to the experience under the law which governs the Philippines. From such reports as reach me, there are indications that more authority should be given to the Governor General, so that he will not be so dependent upon the local legislative body to render effective our efforts to set an example of the sound administration and good government which is so necessary for the preparation of the Philippine people for self-government under ultimate independence. If they are to be trained in these arts, it is our duty to provide for them the best that there is. Retirement of judges. The Act of March 3, 1911 ought to be amended so that the term of years of service of judges of any court of the United States, requisite for retirement with pay, shall be computed to include not only continuous but aggregate service. Mother's Aid. The government ought always to be alert on the side of the humanities. It ought to encourage provisions for economic justice for the defenseless. It ought to extend its relief through its national and local agencies, as may be appropriate in each case, to the suffering and the needy. It ought to be charitable. Although more than 40 of our states have enacted measures in aid of motherhood, the District of Columbia is still without such a law. A carefully considered bill will be presented, which ought to have most thoughtful consideration in order that the Congress may adopt a measure which will be hereafter a model for all parts of the Union. Civil Service. In 1883, the Congress passed the Civil Service Act, which from a modest beginning of 14,000 employees has grown until there are now 425,000 in the classified service. This has removed the clerical force of the nation from the wasteful effects of the spoils system and made it more stable and efficient. The time has come to consider classifying all postmasters, collectors of customs, collectors of internal revenue, and prohibition agents by an act covering in those at present in office, except when otherwise provided by executive order. The necessary statistics are now being gathered to form the basis of a valuation of the Civil Service Retirement Fund based on current conditions of the service. It is confidently expected that this valuation will be completed in time to be made available to the Congress during the present session. It will afford definite knowledge of existing and future liabilities under the present law, and determination of liabilities under any proposed change in the present law. We should have this information before creating further obligations for retirement annuities, which will become liabilities to be met in the future from the money of the taxpayer. The Classification Act of 1923, with the subsequent legislative action providing for adjustment of the compensation of field service positions, has operated materially to improve employment conditions in the federal service. The administration of the act is in the hands of an impartial board, functioning without the necessity of a direct appropriation. It would be inadvisable at this time to place in other hands the administration of this act. Federal Trade Commission. The proper function of the Federal Trade Commission is to supervise and correct those practices in commerce which are detrimental to fair competition. In this, it performs a useful function and should be continued and supported. It was designed also to be a help to honest business. In my message to the 68th Congress, I recommended that changes in the procedure then existing be made. Since then, the Commission by its own action has reformed its rules, giving greater speed and economy in the disposal of its cases, and full opportunity for those accused to be heard. These changes are improvements, and, if necessary, provision should be made for their permanency. Reorganization. No final action has yet been taken on the measure providing for the reorganization of the various departments. I therefore suggest that this measure, which will be of great benefit to the efficient and economical administration of the business of the government, be brought forward and passed. The Negro. Nearly 1/10 of our population consists of the Negro race. The progress which they have made in all the arts of civilization in the last 60 years is almost beyond belief. Our country has no more loyal citizens. But they do still need sympathy, kindness, and helpfulness. They need reassurance that the requirements of the government and society to deal out to them even-handed justice will be met. They should be protected from all violence and supported in the peaceful enjoyment of the fruits of their labor. Those who do violence to them should be punished for their crimes. No other course of action is worthy of the American people. Our country has many elements in its population, many different modes of thinking and living, all of which are striving in their own way to be loyal to the high ideals worthy of the crown of American citizenship. It is fundamental of our institutions that they seek to guarantee to all our inhabitants the right to live their own lives under the protection of the public law. This does not include any license to injure others materially, physically, morally, to incite revolution, or to violate the established customs which have long had the sanction of enlightened society. But it does mean the full right to liberty and equality before the law without distinction of race or creed. This condition cannot be granted to others or enjoyed by ourselves except by the application of the principle of broadest tolerance. Bigotry is only another name for slavery. It reduces to serfdom not only those against whom it is directed, but also those who seek to apply it. An enlarged freedom can only be secured by the application of the Golden Rule. No other utterance ever presented such a practical rule of life. Conclusion. It is apparent that we are reaching into an era of great general prosperity. It will continue only so long as we shall use it properly. After all, there is but a fixed quantity of wealth in this country at any fixed time. The only way that we can all secure more of it is to create more. The element of time enters into production. If the people have sufficient moderation and contentment to be willing to improve their condition by the process of enlarging production, eliminating waste and distributing equitably, a prosperity almost without limit lies before us. If the people are to be dominated by selfishness, seeking immediate riches by non-productive speculation, and by wasteful quarreling over the returns from industry, they will be confronted by the inevitable results of depression and privation. If they will continue industrious and thrifty, contented with fair wages and moderate profits, and the returns which accrue from the development of our natural resources, our prosperity will extend itself indefinitely. In all your deliberations, you should remember that the purpose of legislation is to translate principles into action. It is an effort to have our country be better by doing better. Because the thoughts and ways of people are firmly fixed and not easily changed, the field within which immediate improvement can be secured is very narrow. Legislation can provide opportunity. Whether it is taken advantage of or not depends upon the people themselves. The government of the United States has been created by the people. It is solely responsible to them. It will be most successful if it is conducted solely for their benefit. All its efforts would be of little avail unless they brought more justice, more enlightenment, more happiness and prosperity into the home. This means an opportunity to observe religion, secure education, and earn a living under a reign of law and order. It is the growth and improvement of the material and spiritual life of the nation. We shall not be able to gain these ends merely by our own action. If they come at all, it will be because we have been willing to work in harmony with the abiding purpose of a divine providence. End of section 4.